All right. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Evergreen Liveline. My name is Tom, and I hope everybody's doing good today. It is another cold and snowy day in the Pacific Northwest. I am in central Washington. We didn't get any snow today, but it's been definitely a snowy February. We didn't have much in the regular months of December and early January, so we're getting all of our snow now. I wanted to talk a little bit more today about consistency and just sort of talk a little bit more about my experience with routine and how it has helped me stay on the path that I want to be on. I am an addict and an alcoholic. I started using pretty young, 8 or 9. Both my parents are addicts and alcoholics as well. My dad died 2005, and my mom has been sober about 25 years. I've been sober for 4 years myself, and it wasn't this time getting sober wasn't my first time trying to get sober. It took me several tries. I've been in treatment and detox for opiates, heroin, and opiates. If I say opiates and heroin, it's I consider them to be the same thing. I never would have started using heroin had I been able to stay on. If I was able to procure enough opiates in pill form, I never would have started shooting heroin. Just happened that before I started my opiate habit, I had tried heroin sort of randomly. Just, being around people who drink and use drugs, you get exposed to all types of things. And I'd gotten strung out on pills and was no longer able to get pills. It just became too much of a hassle. And I was living in Portland at the time and went downtown, met a guy, got his number, and was able to stay loaded until my first time of going to treatment. I meant everything. Every time I went to treatment, of the handful of times, I meant to stay sober every single time. I didn't go into any treatment situation. Take that back. I did get a DUI in 1996 before I had any inclination of getting sober and had to do the mandated outpatient and was loaded the whole time I was there. I had no intention of getting sober, but I do not consider that one of my, it was exposure. It was, and any exposure, in my opinion, to treatment is good exposure. But I had no intention of staying sober. And the first time I got sober in 2000, or for my first attempt at getting sober, I meant everything while I was there. But when I got out of treatment, there's life in treatment and there's life after treatment. And if you don't follow through with the things that you outline for yourself or that are outlined, in your treatment exit plan and whatnot, the likelihood of staying sober are pretty slim. I lasted maybe a week or two my first time. And the several times that I've been in and out of treatment, it was always a couple of weeks to a month or two. One time I actually lasted a year outside of treatment. But still, I was still doing things my way. I didn't have a sponsor. I wasn't working any steps. I wasn't following anybody's direction but my own. And when it came down to whatever I was facing and faced with the decision of to use or not to use, I chose to. And it always started out with a little something here, a couple of drinks, a couple of pills, and then eventually it always led to full blown. And in using, the only thing that is consistent is for somebody with, like myself, who has the genetics for addiction and alcoholism, substance use disorder. You can call it, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an opiate addict, I'm a pot addict, whatever. Benzos, substance use disorder is what the official psychological term for addiction is these days. But whatever it is, when you're in the mess of it, the only routine that you have is using and continuing to use. And it's usually in order to keep it going, it takes a lot of lies and manipulation in order to continue in the process of using without having the whole thing come crumbling down. And that's pretty much the only consistency, is to consistently use and to consistently lie and manipulate people around you. So in trying to live life outside of treatment, the only thing that I have found to work for me is also consistency. The first 90 days being sober and out of treatment, I was in a meeting every day. The next, that after that 90 days and through the next year, I was in a meeting, 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes 5, sometimes again every day. I had a sponsor. I still have. Well, he's still my sponsor. He's on Oahu, Uncle Steve. But since then, meetings were valuable to me, and a lot of people find connections in meetings, whether it's insert whatever anonymous or self-help group. They're all great. They're all wonderful. I support them for anybody who uses them. They offer connections. They offer support. They offer, especially for fighting loneliness, they're really a good thing. Myself, I do not. I still go to a meeting now and again when I'm traveling to visit my aunt and mother. They live about 2.5 hours away. I do go to a meeting there because I had, friends there. But as far as going to meetings consistently, for me, it's not part of my routine. I have a different routine. I still read out of the big book every morning and every night. I still journal every day. So it's not a strict routine, but having routine has allowed me to not have to worry so much. I'm one who I am a high anxiety person. I wouldn't say that I would be diagnosed as any, of course, the drive of doctors to diagnose people is astounding lately, and it would not surprise me if I were to talk to a doctor or a psychiatrist and they would like to diagnose me with some sort of generalized anxiety disorder. It wouldn't surprise me, but I personally don't feel that I have an anxiety disorder. And I have found that the main relief for any anxiety that I have was to be consistent and to create a routine that worked for me and to stick with it. And at first, forming a routine was not natural. I mean, the great thing about treatment, though, is that one thing you do learn is routine. And for me, it was Salvation Army, the adult recovery program, the ARC, and it's 6 months. And in 6 months, you get to build quite a bit of routine. And so kind of carrying that out, sort of the little things that were instilled during those 6 months, which I was in one for 6 months, was out for about 4 months, and then right back in. And but since that second time, which was about the 10th time that I've been in treatment and detox, realizing that sticking to a routine was what was ultimately necessary for me to stay sober. But what I found in a routine is a relief from anxiety by kind of, it's been almost 4 years since I used last. And my days they pretty much go the same way all the time. Not so much though that when I'm out of the routine that I feel uncomfortable and I am caused more anxiety, but because of having a routine and kind of sticking to it, I feel like I have a lot less anxiety. And that is, that's through consistency. That's through the Aristotle quote that I bring up often. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. And the single act of getting sober can be enough for people. Some people just decide, I'm done, and they never drink or use again. For other people like myself, the single act of not using, which I had tried countless times before, wasn't enough. And building the routine allowed me, and the affirmations that I make in the morning and at night and throughout the day in meditation and prayer and journaling and just sort of knowing what path I'm on. So this is my single act is something that I repeatedly do. Routine has allowed me, because I have a routine, I'm not necessarily worried about, okay, what's tomorrow going to be like? There are variables all the time. There are certain appointments that we have to go to. There are different things that come up. But when you get yourself into a routine, there's a lot less guesswork. And there's a lot less ironing out of the details. And I found that takes away the anxiety of what I used to find. I lived in bigger cities. The last few years, 3 out of the last 4 years, moving back from Honolulu, which oftentimes people think of being in Hawaii as just like a super mellow place. And overall, Hawaii is pretty mellow, but Honolulu is not. It's pretty crazy. There's more traffic. I lived in the Bay Area and I lived in Portland, and they're equal, I would say, in some ways, as to how much effing time you spend in traffic. It's nauseating. And the downtown of Hawaii, hustle and bustle. So what also helped me was not living in a large metropolitan area. I live I'm in university right now in Washington State, and but it's a smaller town, and it's given me a much different feel. And I feel that that's helped me out quite a bit with anxiety as well. But the routine is sort of the anchor to what I have going on these days. It's one of the most valuable things that I have. And I was one of those people who thought that routine was for squares. That routine was for military type people, which my dad was in the Marine Corps. Kind of a different guy though. He was in Vietnam, left very, disenfranchised with government and society altogether. And like I said at the beginning of the video, is no longer with us. He died pretty strange accident, and he was very much alone, and that was mostly due to his inability to stick with the program and stay sober. I wish I knew more about him. I really don't. But I do know that he died alone, and that's one thing that both my mother and I, even though they weren't in really good contact and we had limited contact, it would have been nice to, no matter what the circumstances are, having somebody there when they are going out. It's a sad thing to consider that a person can be entirely alone when they die. And not that none of us cared about him. It was when people, after the accident, people weren't really sure who to contact, and he wasn't necessarily coherent. So it's a little bit about my dad and my past. I wasn't really sure that that was coming out today, but it's good healing stuff. And that is also part of the reason why I appreciate meetings, is the ability to talk. A lot of times we have things in our head and we think that they're great ideas, and we think that they're ones that we want to expound on, and that we want to, this is what these ideas that we have that we mold in our heads about our future. And there aren't necessarily things that we talk to other people about. And there's sort of a danger in there. I mean, it's good to have, your inner monologue and your planning for the future, but if you don't share those ideas, if you don't share the ideas that are in your head, especially for someone like me, you drink and you use, and your views get a little bit skewed. If you don't talk about them with somebody else, how do you know if they're crazy or not? I mean, granted, it also depends on who the person is that you're talking to, but just being able to say your ideas out loud and hear yourself saying them, I think is gives you a little bit more objective view. Like when they say when you're writing a paper that the best thing you can do is read it out loud, because after you've written it and you see all the words on the paper and you're reading it in your head, we have the ability to self-correct words as we read them when they're screwed up. But when you say them out loud, you can tell when something's jumbled and when something's not right. And I think that has a lot to do with the ideas that are in our heads, and being able to talk about them with somebody else is good and gives you an insight as to whether or not you're on the right track. And the best thing to do is to know when you're wrong, to know if you can know that the ideas that you have going on in your head are incorrect and self-correct. Not even that other person that you're talking to doesn't even have to tell you, that's fucked up. Why would you even think that? You sharing it with somebody else and then going home and sort of going over regurgitate is not the right word to use there, but sort of mulling over the words that you just said, and after hearing them out loud, kind of gives you the ability to go, wow, maybe I was on the right track, or maybe I was on the wrong track, and really discern your ideas. And that is why, meetings for a lot of people are a good thing. And it's especially your first year or two, whether you stick with it or not. And that's a lot of people who get into treatment, and they're like with people who are kind of on the fence about staying sober. And there's a reason why people use drugs, because they effing work. Bill Hicks is right. For him and myself, stopping using drugs was sort of a matter of life and death, and it was a really good decision. But at the same time, there were a lot of good times to be had. Unfortunately, they don't last. And that's why drinking and using drugs, in my opinion, is a huge lie for those of us who do not have the ability to, separate it from other important things. full either on or off with using. And that's not a good place to be. To all of the people out there who drink and use drugs or use substances, use whatever, I have no ill will towards anyone. And if it were up to me, I think everything should be legal. I mean, if alcohol, the most inebriating substance of all of them, causing more death and accidents and health issues and child abuse and anything else you want to talk about, if that's legal, I am of the opinion that everything should be illegal. And there's caveats for anything, but that's pretty much the way I think about it. Why would one be legal and something else not illegal? We can ask the pharmaceutical and people who are in the business of incarceration that question, but I'm not of the mind. I'm not one for telling people what to do, and that's definitely not what I would like. This live stream is not. I'm not the authority. I'm not the guru. I'm just a person who has had some time of success in not shooting heroin and drinking. That's it. And if I can create a conversation with other people, and maybe what I'm doing is what I was talking about, is having the ideas in my head, and if they never come out, if you never hear yourself talk about them, then maybe that's exactly what's going on today and through this live stream, and that will be what it is for me. But being able to make connections and friends through the meetings is super important in people in new sobriety, because oftentimes most of our friends are drinkers and users and people who are kind of caught up in that, and not that they're ill meaning, some are, but not that all of them are ill meaning people, but when somebody else is drinking and using, it's very easy to, if you're hanging around, to pass to, yeah, there's beer in the fridge, man, help yourself. Because they're not thinking, not that they aren't respectful of a person trying to sober up, but at the same time, it's just not, that's not where they're at. And so yes, so I am in university. I am a psychology and sociology major. I will be graduating in June. I have a chemical dependency professional trainee license in the state of Washington. So as I was saying before, I'm not looking to, this is not an authoritative standpoint for me for doing this chat. I simply want to, I like to watch YouTube, and I like to watch, I enjoy the places where there are chats. So if there is, I haven't seen any, please, if you notice them, please put them in the comments of other places where people are chatting about with this kind of topic or something similar. Please let me know, because I just haven't come across it, and I would like this to be a place where we can talk about stuff like that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about addiction and using and sobriety and recovery, which isn't a word. I mentioned this in my last one. I don't like the word recovery, not for any particular reason other than I just don't like it. I think it sounds funny. It sounds, it just sounds victim-y to me. I'm in recovery, which is, but please don't, that's just my personal opinion, but we will continue to use the recovery in a positive light, because I believe that it is positive. And any exposure to things like these, like I said, any exposure is good exposure. So I am a psychology major. I do have a chemical dependency professional training license in Washington, which basically I could work in an entry-level position of supervised counselor role, and for, however many hours that I'll need to do, about a year and a half of supervised hours. And then being able to go on to certified counselor, and with a master's degree, I could get, which will come later, a licensed mental health counselor is probably the road I'm going. I do plan to work with incarcerated people. I think that it's obviously a need, and it's obviously people who have very limited exposure to anything positive in their lives. When you're in prison, there are few things that are positive, and I don't necessarily think that there should be a ton of things that are positive, but a way for incarcerated people to be able to do what we're doing right here, talk, and get those ideas that are bouncing around in their head with somebody who's had some experience in effing things up and now doesn't. Because when you're incarcerated, or you're in jail, or you're in prison, the only other people that you have to talk with are other incarcerated people who are in jail or prison, and they're usually not. Who knows what they're thinking? Hopefully, in a perfect world, they would all be thinking about doing the right thing and contributing to their fellow men and women when they leave, their fellow people when they leave. But usually that's not the case. And if I could be some sort of an example in a prison or in a jail, that's what I'd like to do. So that's my plan for the future. I currently so back to meetings, and meetings for me. Personally, it's not a big part of my routine. I do attend the occasional meeting when I'm where I'm living right now. I'm going to school, and I don't necessarily know a lot of people. That doesn't mean that I can't go to meetings, and I have gone to a few here. It's just not, some things aren't for everybody. But what was for me was working steps, following directions, and going, in the steps. There's a whole lot of personal redemption that goes on, a whole lot of self-respect to be gained. And it's not a quick process. The 12 steps are not meant to be done in an afternoon. They're not meant to be done by simply reading them once. They're usually something that happens over a long period of time, and things that continue into the rest of your life, because we're still going to screw up. We're still going to do things that, because we're all fallible and none of us is perfect all the time, there's still going to be times when you'll need to make amends. There's still going to be times when, the making of a personal inventory is going to be important at other times. Even though you're sober, it doesn't mean that you are above doing bad things. I mean, we all know people who don't have issues with drugs and alcohol, but they still have issues, and that's kind of the way it goes. So even though I'm not a avid meeting goer currently, and who's to say that I won't at some other time when I find myself in other circumstances, it might be something that I continue to do. But I still carry on the inventory, the amends, the dedicating myself to my higher power, which was kind of a big deal for me. This last time getting sober, granted, while I was in a Salvation Army program, at the time I was not. I still don't consider myself to be a religious person. I've always had, even as a kid, a connection with God, who I've always recognized as Jesus. It's what I'm able to. It's what I'm able to recognize as my higher power, as Jesus. I know this is kind of this may be a little bit odd, but it's kind of like saying, for me, it's kind of like saying, like, hey, will you give me a Kleenex? We don't always say tissue or a facial tissue or a, whatever your thing is, whatever you can conceptualize and verbalize a thing. And for me, what I've been able to conceptualize and verbalize and is Jesus, as when I think of God in the the third step is you're giving your will and your life to God as you understand Him, or her, or it, or the universe, or an undefinable force that you can conceive. For me, I have always conceptualized that as Jesus, and even in this Salvation Army program, I was not able at the time. I still was sort of in my phase of, as a metalhead, as a guy who anti-establishment, anti-religion, anti-everything else. I didn't want to admit how I always felt in saying Jesus. That's just some religious baloney. But so even in the program, it wasn't. I wasn't going to go to church. I still really don't. I go every once in a while when I go and visit my aunt, the same place where I go and do meetings. She's in church every week, and she's a wonderful person, and I go with her because it's a way to connect with her. It's a way for us to go and talk, and hearing some good words and meeting some good people is there's nothing wrong with that. And being able to. So, what was different about this time, though, was right before I went into detox, I had gotten off of opiates this last time. Before I went into detox and treatment this last time, I had gotten off. I ran out of opiates. I shouldn't say gotten off. I ran out and began drinking, and was drinking really heavily all day, every day, and blacking out for days at a time, not really knowing exactly what day it was, unless I was looking at my phone to see how much money I had left in my bank account at the time, and seeing, I know exactly how much it was to buy a bottle of booze and a few of the Aloha drinks in a can to wash it down with. And I remembered how much that was, and so as I'm looking through the days, as this short time, it didn't take long for me from picking up using opiates again for about a week and then drinking my face off for what looked to be about a couple of weeks. But I don't remember exactly how much. So anyway, I'm looking in there, and so I ran out of money, and I was like, I haven't been to work in 2 weeks, and I need to stop this nonsense anyways. And I had just gotten out of the Salvation Army program, maybe 3 or 4 months I had been out, and wasn't doing well, obviously. And so right before I really started going into DTs and hallucinating for a few days, I said to God, as I understood Him, but I really didn't understand Him at the time. When I say God as I understand Him, it's the thing that we say in meetings. It's God as however you can conceptualize God. And at the time, I wasn't even willing to say Jesus. And I had just started to really know that the DTs the check was in the mail for the DTs. And this was where you read in the big book about DTs and delirium tremens, and you hear it in meetings, and you read it in the book. And I thought it was just sort of one of those folksy things for freaking out. I didn't really know what delirium tremens was, DTs. It's actually the doctors and nurses will say it in the hospital. The DTs got the DTs, delirium tremens, and they are real. And I hallucinate just before I went into real vivid hallucinations for about 2.5 days. I said to God, and I wasn't even using Jesus at the time, I said to God, if you exist, prove it. You know, something to that. I don't remember the exact thing I said, but I do remember saying that. And vivid hallucinations, freaked out for a few days, ended up in detox again for the last, this is the last time. Ended up in detox for the last time. And I thought that I had lost my mind. Was willing to do anything because I didn't know if I was coming back. I really thought that I had gone that far. I was unable, I couldn't really talk. My balance was all out of whack for about a week and a half, maybe a little bit longer, because I was at a friend's house for about a week just trying to get my head on straight, and then went to detox for about a week. I had to fudge because I really thought I'd lost myself. I had to fudge that I had been drinking, because I hadn't when I got into detox. I drank one more night before I went into detox, just to sort of, actually it wasn't even that motivation. I drank a day or two before I went into detox. When I got on the phone, I told them I'd been drinking for like 2 weeks straight, however much a day. And just so that they would let me stay, because I thought I had lost my marbles. And went into detox. And 4 or 5 months, I can't remember if I was still in the Salvation Army program before I had left, so it may have been 6 or 7 months. And after that night, before I went into the DTs, and however many months later, I found myself just chuckling to myself, just like honestly happy and laughing and relieved, and had found something. I had realized something, that when I asked God to prove to me that He existed, as I was sitting there laughing, I realized that He had. Because here was this guy, me, who was unable to stay sober through 10 trips to treatment and as many trips to detox, in and out. How many second, third, eighth, and 10th chances my family had given me back and forth, and all the lies, the BS for years that I told everyone and convinced myself of. That God as I understand Him, Jesus had proved it, because I was sober. And that was the great epiphany. That was the great thing. And that's through all of these things, working steps, following through. So consistency is what really has been different. And accepting that what I had always conceptualized as a higher power was, I was right not right. I don't want to say I'm right, because that's not it. The way I felt, and it's each person's thing with a higher power or with a connection that they make in something like this is their own. And the connection that I had when I was young, before I detached myself, and now at that point, after I was chuckling, and I realized that I had stopped refusing to let a higher power that I conceptualized when I was younger, when I stopped refusing it, when I stopped shutting it out of my life, this was the thing that was different, where I was able to stay sober. That and consistency. And the consistency of realizing that it was me, not the higher power, that was being inconsistent. It was me that was not living up to the universal expectations of sticking to your word, of following through, of doing the right thing, of choosing to do the right thing instead of choosing to do the wrong thing. And for people that is different. But for me, it was using and not using, stealing and not stealing, lying and telling the truth. And when I stopped refusing and began to follow through with my part, which was consistency of choices, consistency of doing the right thing, consistency of staying in the light, so to speak. through that, I've been able to stay sober, and through that, making simple goals, small ones. Oftentimes, I write them down. Like I print out my assignments, and I scratch them off, and I write the days that I'm going to do them, and I scratch them off as I complete it, or write in what else I need to do. I just make, and there's nothing, I was talking about yesterday, being able to see things as you scratch them off. As making a list and be able to see that you complete it. I mean, granted, if you say, I need to do laundry, and I can look over and I can see that my clothes are folded and I don't have a pile of effing dirty laundry, or I can look out and I need to mow the lawn, and I can look outside and see, okay, the lawn's mowed. But also visualizing that, having the list and visualizing it and crossing it off. And you're getting in a habit of feeling the benefits of small successes, of a gradual buildup of success over time, however small. I mean, a lot of us come from a time when it was all failure, and any success we had was based on a lie or a manipulation. That's not an actual success. To me, I don't consider that to be an actual success. Gains made without integrity, in my opinion, are not success. And as we are able to build up small successes over time, no matter how small, just that they're good, in whatever your conception of good is, you're going to know. It's not your conception of good is not mine, and mine is not yours, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, there are things that we can probably agree on that are good and that are not so good, or bad, or wrong. And it seems strange that in our society, those lines are getting skewed even more all the time, which is sort of frightening to me. But being able to build on small successes has allowed me to build on bigger successes. I remember when I was in the program about 4 years ago, and I was 40 at the time, and I told the friend that I had in there, who I haven't heard from in a while, and I hope he's doing okay. I said to him, because I had been in school before. I had started my AA degree, and I'd started working on the chemical dependency professional programs, or curriculum, excuse me, in 2008, and was on track for about a year, but got off track again. And so I could conceptualize the steps that I needed to go through in order to get back into it, and was saying at the time that I was 40 at the time, that by the time I was 45, that I wanted to get back to school, and I wanted to get my certificate and complete to be doing what I'm doing now. I'm not necessarily working in the field yet, but I'm definitely a lot closer than I was 4 years ago. So, and I said by 45, I'd like to have my AA degree, and I'd like to have my certificate, and I'd like to be working in the field. So at 43, I'm 3/4 of the way there. And it's only that big success, which I haven't quite achieved yet, but on that road to that success, I have had other assignments that I needed to check off along the way. And any self-respect that I have right now is because I've been able to build up on small successes, and they are turning into larger successes. I've been in all manner of terrible relationships. Terrible, me being the terrible person. Terrible as in the girl being the terrible person. Feeding into each other's terribleness. And I find myself now in the healthiest relationship that I've ever had. And it wasn't until, you're often suggested when you get into the program to wait about a year. And this last time I sobered up, I was like, I don't need to be in any relationship ever again. I knew the goals and the things that I wanted to do, and the so many failures that I've had in relationships in the past, I really wasn't concerned about getting into a relationship. And about a year and a half after sobering up, I got a little message from an old friend in high school who she was a great friend. I found, we were attracted to each other, but just never dated. It was really, really a platonic, close friendship. Those were few and far between for me in high school. And not somebody I drank with, not somebody I used with. She's actually one of the normal people who can drink or, smoke a little weed every now and again. It doesn't ruin her life like I do when I decide to drink and use. And it was that I was still going to meetings pretty regularly at the time when this came up. And when I do my journaling every morning, and I was talking about this with my sponsor, and I dedicate my part of that third step of recognizing our higher power and giving our will and our lives to God as we understand Him. I was telling my sponsor about it. I got this connection. I don't think I'm gonna go for it because I'm on this path of I don't need a relationship. What I'd like to do is achieve these other things. And for a lot of times that getting into a relationship, especially early in sobriety, has been a big distraction. And so as I'm explaining this is what I'm getting back to what I was talking about earlier, is you have these ideas in your head, and until you can talk about it, and until you can express it with somebody else, you don't really know if it's crazy or not. So I'm telling my sponsor at the time, I'm like, hey, I don't know if I want to go and pursue this thing with my old friend. She's a great person, but I really wasn't interested. So that as I'm saying this, he says, so you dedicate your will and your life to God, and you ask, so this is coming in your life, you're not going to follow it. And I was like, oh, wow. So I don't remember the exact words that he said, but something along those lines is like, okay, so you're dedicating yourself to your higher power, but when he sends you something, you're not going to listen to it. That's what you're telling me. And essentially that's what I was doing. And it didn't turn out to be a distraction. It didn't turn out to be, she doesn't live anywhere. She doesn't even live in the same state. We actually have a state in between us. She lives in that communist state. No, I'm just kidding. She is in California, and I'm in Washington. And things are good, though. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with consistency and being able to, part of why, even if maybe nobody else will show up. We had a person show up the other day, and that was really cool, from the UK, and in the chat, and that was awesome. So part of, I guess, mainly whatever evergreenliveline is my favorite form of entertainment. I listen to it every day, mostly at night, is Loveline with Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew. It's my favorite. It's my favorite form of entertainment. If I could only have one, it'd be a tough call. PlayStation or Evergreen or Loveline. I would probably have to. That would be for very careful consideration, but I think it would be. Loveline. I mean, there are a few books that I wouldn't necessarily want to live without, but anyway. So evergreenliveline is sort of my homage to Evergreen. I'm in the Evergreen state. I'm in Cascadia. Um, and I didn't want to call it Love Line because it's not love, but we are live chatting, and line being my hat tip to Loveline. So yeah, my name is Tom. Please leave any comments, any suggestions. If you're inclined to subscribe and show up, I think I have 2 subscribers, and anybody who has taken the time to watch this, I sincerely appreciate you. Please leave your comments. Please, I'll probably be back later, if not today, for sure tomorrow. And I hope that you all are doing well and have a good evening or morning or whatever it is where you're at. Thanks a lot.